The person I've ever co-authored a book with. It's called The Fair Tax Fantasy because Hank actually knows something about taxes and I can push it down against a verb. Good morning, Hank, professor of accounting at Chapman and retired partner at Deloitte. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. How are you doing?
Well, I am great. Now, I am amazed because in Tuesday's Wall Street Journal, there's an editorial that name checks you and former Congressman Christopher Cox for an op-ed you wrote. I've never read a Wall Street Journal editorial that is actually just quote borrowing from your op-ed. Why is it such a big deal, and why are you feeling happy today?
Well, yesterday the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case called Charles and Kathleen Moore, which is a case which will decide, hopefully forever, that the government cannot tax appreciation, that the government has to wait until there's a transaction. And in the tax world, that's a very, very big deal.
Let's start with our plaintiffs. They're just minding their own business, investing in what, an Irish company?
An Indian company.
Indian
and
company.
Literally minding their own business. They buy 11% of a small company in India that sells small tools to Indian farmers.
And so what happened to them?
What happens is they invest, and I think there was probably some charitable opportunity here for them. They were just trying to do the right thing based on what I've read. And nothing happens. They're in the investment for 10 or 11 years, and the company's actually doing well, and they're reinvesting all the proceeds. And they wake up in the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, and suddenly they find out the government wants to tax their share of the earnings of that Indian company for the 8 or 9 years they've owned it. And they've never received a dividend. They've never received a share of stock. They've never received anything. And now the government wants to come in and tax them.
Now, you know, Hank Adler, that is what they sold in the Trump tax reform as being a way to repatriate the wealth of people like Apple. That is not what it was intended to do. And it should be chilling to every American that if they invest in something, the government now claims the ability to tax appreciate. Because that company can go bankrupt tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you can look, the parallel on the valuation would be FTX and the cryptocurrencies that were worth something on December 31, 2022, and are worth not a farthing today.
Now, we know the IRS can and does pass very bad rules, and we know that Congress can and does pass very bad statutes. We don't know if this is unconstitutional, and I don't even hazard a guess here because I don't know anything about direct taxation, but I think some pretty smart people, including you and Chris Cox, think this is direct taxation, not apportioned among the states.
That's correct. Direct taxation, for your listeners, we're only, at least for the last 100 and some odd years, we've only taxed, few exceptions, we've only taxed when a transaction took place, and therefore we are not taxing wealth. And the 16th Amendment is designed only to tax income. So, your viewers wouldn't want a list of the court cases, but most of the court cases in the last 100 years have said something has to happen. There has to be a transaction before there's taxation.
Yeah, there's this term called a taxable event. And that's a term that I expect every law student to know, and I hope every American knows, but it's when you realize income or gain. It's not that complicated. And if you invest in something and you haven't realized income or a gain or a dividend, there's just nothing to tax there.
That's correct, Hugh. And the parallel here, and nobody has proposed it, but if we could tax the Moors on this income from India that they never saw a penny, it is not a huge step to wake up tomorrow morning and say that everyone that owns a share of any corporation that's had income that has not distributed to the shareholders is taxable today on that entire amount. And, of course, that's ludicrous.
Now, Hank, when you were at Deloitte, I'm sure you saw a lot of income tax returns where people invest in companies and that investment appreciates or depreciates. But does it ever go in a straight line inevitably?
Not in my experience. And for the really successful, the value of the asset generally explodes far in advance of when there's cash to pay the taxes.
And so if this is not checked, everybody in America is going to be subject to the principle that unrealized gains can be taxed no matter where you are in the transaction. We got a minute, Hank. That would be a disaster for startup economy, wouldn't it?
Well, sure. It would take money out of corporations at the exact moment that they need to reinvest and build the companies. Our system, I guess our economic system, provides that we should reinvest, create jobs, create an economy, and this would be to the detriment of that.
Hank Adler and Christopher Cox, you were ahead of the game here, and I have never, in 50 years of reading the Journal, I've never read an editorial that basically cribs a column. But they did, because you were right before anyone else was right, so I salute them. Hank, good to talk to you, my friend. Glad you're back from Hawaii. Go out and protect unrealized gains all day long, every day.
You take care, my friend.
Thank you, Hank Adler.